Welcome to Jurassic Park.
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind.
Welcome to the party, pal.
I'll be back.
I'll have what she's had.
I'm gonna make him an offer again.
Here's looking at you, kid.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome back to another episode of More Than Pixels on a Screen, a spoilerific movie review podcast brought to you by Banterflix. This week we are going all things webhead. We're going a little bit of spider frenzy. No, it's not a recap of Madam Web. We are going back to 2002, where for some it all started. As we look back to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, we'll also be looking back at his 2004 sequel, and we'll also be talking about Spider-Man 3 from 2007. Does it deserve a bit more love? Does it need kicking a little bit harder? Well, stick around, listeners, and you'll hear what myself and my lovely co-host, my guy in the chair, no, that's technically not from this series. It's Adam, what's happening, Spidey Neeson.
I'm just whipping all over New York, Jim. Getting my webs everywhere.
So, Adam, on this pod, we are going to be talking all things Spider-Man, specifically the Sam Raimi trilogy, because all the live-action Spider-Man movies are back in cinemas. By the time this episode is out and edited, probably been about 2 years since it's been back in cinemas, but they are back in kicking things off. We've had Spider-Man, which was out a couple of weeks ago, Spider-Man 2, around the time we are recording now, Spider-Man 3 is about to hit, and then we'll get into the Andrew Garfield stuff, and then we have the Tom Holland, and of course this all comes full circle because you have Spider-Man No Way Home, when we can talk about it now. It's not a spoiler, when all three of the live-action Spider-Men came together to save the multiverse. And we'll be talking about that film in particular in the Tom Holland section of this series. I know, Adam, you're going to be talking, you're actually ditching me for a pod. Do you want to tell our listeners, I know we're talking about Tobey Maguire, we're going to get into that in just a second, but do you want to tell our listeners who's going to be talking with you about the Garfield 2 films?
So I'll be talking to a gentleman called Mark Corrigan. He runs a successful wax melting business on Etsy called Video Flames, which is wax melts based around scents that you would smell in video games. Very niche thing, but it's successful. But the reason I'm getting him in is that we used to work together, and we grew a friendship over our love of Spider-Man. And he mentioned to me that when he was in university, he did his film thesis on Emma Stone's performance as Gwen Stacy in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. So I thought, why not get an expert in on two of the worst films in the repertoire of Spider-Man?
That's a bit harsh and all, Andrew, but we will come back, I think, to Gwen Stacy in this pod because she does make an appearance in Spider-Man 3. We'll come back to that. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the Tobey Maguire movies. 2002, the first one. I remember seeing it at the cinema. I was a massive Spider-Man fan before that, would have read the comics. I think I've talked about in this pod before. I used to pick up the Spider-Man comics when I was at school, and I came home, and for some reason I was a weirdo. My place, and you're a comic book reader, Adam, so maybe you had a place as well, a special place where you like to read your comics. And mine, for some reason, was we have outhouses. My mum has an outhouse, and she kept the dryer there. So I would have when I came home from school, got the bus, and even though I had a key to the house, I'd have sit with a little, garden chair or a bit of garden furniture, sit on that, put the dryer on. This is back when electricity wasn't mental prices, and would have just sat with the dryer, the air from the dryer, go gushing in my face, and I would have been reading my Spider-Man comics, and I was as happy as Larry. Spider-Man 2000 AD, all that kind of stuff. So I remember being really stupendously, stupidly excited about Spider-Man. But when I was doing a bit of prep for this pod, shock horror, listeners, everyone's always shocked when I say this. This is me prepared. Yeah. Imagine me if I just tried to wing it. I'm definitely not going to be a madman. Definitely not going to be that. But I was surprised. I never heard this before. Maybe I hadn't forgotten. But over the years, there's been various kind of attempts to bring Spider-Man to the big screen. There is some 70s and 80s versions that I don't know if you've seen them or not, but maybe they deserve some love. I've never got round to watching them. I know that I think Canon wanted to do a Spider-Man movie, but then when Spider-Man 4, or not Spider-Man, sorry, when Superman 4 just bombed at the box office, that killed all that. But I was surprised to read that James Cameron, I know we need to get the Arspert Joe McElroy on and do our James Cameron deep dive, but he at one point was attached and he wrote a screenplay, a draft, and was at one point attached for a Spider-Man movie that, I think you mentioned this before we started to record, Leonardo DiCaprio was attached.
Yeah, it seems that, with Leo being the hot new shit at the time, and obviously Cameron had him in mind after Titanic, that he seemed like the inevitable person that would play Peter Parker. Ironically, it ended up going to Leonardo DiCaprio's best friend at the time, Tobey Maguire, instead. But Cameron's Spider-Man would have been, much darker, much sexier. Like we said before the podcast, that MJ and Spider-Man were meant to have sex on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it's just one of those stories that, in Hollywood, it's the what it could have been, because there's also the story that Michael Jackson wanted to buy the rights to play Spider-Man as well. And that would have been a sight to see, Jim.
That would have been. I don't know if I would have the same long-lasting appeal. I don't think in 2024, I could be wrong, that viewers would be rushing out to rewatch that film on the big screen. I can't picture Leo as Spider-Man. He's too purdy.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, he's too purdy, because I've said this before. I mean, I think Tom Holland, I know we're going to kind of be jumping all over the place in our typical way. I think for me, Tom Holland's probably the perfect kind of all-round Spider-Man. I mean, he is a good-looking guy. He's probably the right age to play the role. Well, was when he started back with Spider-Man Homecoming. But I think for me, Tobey Maguire, and I think I'm hopefully getting this right, I think Stan Lee said when he saw Tobey Maguire, he was like, that's Spider-Man, that's the geeky kid I pictured. Because I think of the three films, yeah, I know Tom Holland's quite geeky as well, particularly in the first one, but Maguire probably captures, for me, the essence of Peter Parker.
Mm-hmm.
I've always kind of said I don't know if he's a great Spider-Man, but I think he's a great Peter Parker, and the fact that those three films, from rewatching them for this pod, the three films are interested in the character of Peter Parker. It's like my thing with Nolan, with Batman. I think you have to be interested in Bruce Wayne to really get a good Batman film, and I think maybe the Garfield ones are kind of a little bit let down by that, but for me, the Raimi stuff, the front and centre, its focus of, particularly I suppose Spider-Man 2 and even Spider-Man 3, it's Peter Parker is as much of an important character as Spider-Man himself.
Yeah, it is one of those things growing up that I kind of went in, expecting Spider-Man, fighting the Green Goblin and stuff, and then it's what set the movie apart from the other superhero movies that you would have got at the time, that Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker was interesting and was relatable. He struggled to keep a job, he struggled to keep a girlfriend. His relationship with his Aunt May, he was just always late, and there was always the underdogness that Raimi was able to capture with Maguire and his version of Peter Parker, and I think that's sort of where people get confused with Spider-Man 3, and we'll get to it when we get to Spider-Man 3, but people don't seem to understand the dance scene in Spider-Man 3. They seem to be like, that's really cringe, even though that's what they are going for. It's, you've watched 2 movies of this really nerdy guy, and whenever he gets powers that make him quote-unquote cool, this is his idea of cool. Going down the street, pointing at the girls, listening to, James Brown or whatever it is. But yeah, for me, growing up, and I know opinions change obviously as you get older, but for me, growing up, Maguire as Peter Parker was as interesting as the Spider-Man, to the point that when I had the action figures, I had both an action figure of Peter Parker in normal clothes and Spider-Man. And then I made them kiss.
Which did you play with more?
There was action figures that you had Peter Parker and you could put his wrestling gear on. When he was, what's the name that they want to call him when he's a wrestler?
The Human Spider?
Oh, the Human Spider, yeah. It was a terrible name. And obviously that scene now is a bit problematic, but whatever, back in the day, I had all the figures. I had Mary Jane, Green Goblin, J. Jonah Jameson, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and it's like, why was a 9-year-old playing with the CEO of a paper company?
What I'm picturing in my head, Adam, is that scene in The Simpsons with Skinner?
Oh, with all the dolls.
They're all here. That's what I'm picturing in my head. There is things, and I know we're kind of frantically jumping about the place here at the start. We probably should get some kind of pattern and some kind of formula for this pod. But I will say this, you've mentioned already, there's little things about the wrestling sequence I know that has dated at some point, but there is things that I find problematic about the Raimi films, and for me, whether you want to dig down into this or we'll keep this for later, is the relationship and how it's portrayed between MJ and Peter, because he's kind of gaslighting her quite a bit, and there's kind of things that you go, that's quite toxic. But I think we'll keep that. We're going to park that. But I thought, Adam, what we would do, we haven't done one of these in a little while. We used to always do when a new Marvel movie or whatever came out, we would always go to Aaron Flanagan from the Comic Book Guys to get a little bit of Comic Book 101. To give everybody about the comic book origins. I know we're going to be talking about the Tobey Maguire and the Raimi movies, but I thought we'd talk a little bit with Aaron just to hear kind of some of the people, some of the writers, some of the illustrators that have worked on the Spider-Man comic over the years, some of Aaron's favourites, and maybe even some notable reads. I wonder if he'll mention the Clone Saga. I wonder. He probably won't, but that's me being a big old nerd. So on that point, I think we will hand over to Aaron with his Comic Book 101 on Spider-Man.
Hi everyone, Aaron from Comic Book Guys here, and today I'm going to take you through the comic book origins of Spider-Man. So obviously we all know who Spider-Man is, but I'm going to take you through a little bit of the background as to who Spider-Man is, how he came about, and really where those comic book origins are. So obviously Spider-Man is one of the most enduring superheroes, and he first appeared in a book called Amazing Fantasy issue 15 way back in 1962, and he was created by the legendary Stan Lee and the legendary artist Steve Ditko. They wanted to create a teenage superhero who had real life problems, and this led to the creation of Peter Parker, who was a high school student who gained superpowers after being bitten by a radioactive spider. We all know this story, but unlike typical superheroes at the time, Peter had to juggle his newfound abilities with his personal struggles at school, his relationships, and through even financial hardship. But obviously his mantra became, with great power comes great responsibility, and this became a defining element of the character, and it emphasised really the moral challenges that he faced. So it really gave us an idea that they were trying to turn the superhero genre and give it a little bit more real life appeal. Spider-Man obviously then quickly became a fan favourite because of this, and it led to some of the most iconic stories in comic book history. You know, books like The Night That Gwen Stacy Died. This was a groundbreaking moment in comics, and it truly shocked readers, and it proved that there was no character safe. For far too long in comic books, either nobody died or there was no stakes, and this was really the first time that you felt that there was nobody was safe. Stories like the Clone Saga, Spider-Verse, all of this stuff expanded the Spider Universe, and it introduced sort of more complex narratives and even alternate versions of Spider-Man that we know and love today. But the character's been shaped, obviously, by some legendary talent, as I've said, but you know, other creators in the comic book industry who really defined Spider-Man that we know and love today were people like John Romita Sr. He succeeded Steve Ditko, and he brought more of a polished and sort of dynamic style to Spider-Man, and it really helped define the character's look for the generations to come, including what we know today. You then went on to people like Todd McFarlane, Mark Bagley. They all introduced sort of more gritty edge to the artwork that was a little bit more pacey, a little bit more dynamic. And then that coupled with writers such as Brian Michael Bendis, who wrote The Ultimate Spider-Man, Jerry Conway, who penned The Death of Gwen Stacy, they've all left a lasting impact really on Spider-Man's mythology, and that's all created this sort of love affair with Spider-Man, because it's made him somebody who's obviously got superpowers but is human at his core. You know, it was the character's popularity that transitioned smoothly to the big screen. It was really the first time, obviously Blade had already been and, you know, really opened up that Marvel universe, but it was the first transition in 2002 that we seen the Spider-Man film on screen, and it was with the Sam Raimi franchise, really. They starred, obviously, Tobey Maguire, who really helped cement Spider-Man as a global icon. It obviously had multiple reboots after that. You had Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland. They've all became Spider-Man in different forms and different guises, and it's all become part of the MCU now. They've all explored different facets of the origins of Spider-Man, really to his role within a broader superhero universe. And it's very important because what it's done is ensure that Spider-Man's relevance is for all generations of fans now, before, and what's to come. Culturally, Spider-Man's impact is profound for me. As one of the first superheroes really to deal with everyday issues, it really resonates with readers who saw themselves in Peter's struggles. You know, I know as a kid growing up reading comic books, I saw a lot of myself in Peter Parker. And as I say, I think that's why so many people are responding to the character, because they see and feel the same things that Peter did. It's inspired so many individuals, and it really has taught the importance of responsibility, resilience, compassion, love, all of those important human qualities that we all, you know, want to have. Spider-Man really broke barriers by being able to relate across different cultures, different generations. He served as a symbol of hope, really, across the idea that anyone, regardless of your background, regardless of your gender, regardless of anything, can be a hero. And it's through comics, TV, film, and all of these mediums that Spider-Man has become far more than just a comic book character. He's become a cultural icon, and he embodies the symbolism and the spirit of heroism in the modern society. You know, Spider-Man for me is not only one of the coolest comic book characters that's ever been, but I would say is probably one of the most important for the reasons that we've talked about.
So that's Aaron with his Comic Book 101 on Spider-Man. You mentioned you had the toys from the movie. As I said, I was a massive Spider-Man fan. Spider-Man 2000 AD, Batman was probably the comics I devoured when I was in my teens. So when Spider-Man came about, it was like, yeah, I'm ready for this. Were you a Spider-Man fan before the films? You know, where did your Spidey love come from?
It sort of began with both the 90s cartoon of Spider-Man that I would have watched every morning before going to school, and also the video games So you kind of had the two video games based on the 90s cartoon that was on like the PlayStation 1. And then also toys of Spider-Man. I had the armored Spider-Man toy. It was like all silver. I don't know why I got that one specifically. I just thought that's pretty cool. And then whenever the movie started coming out, you had more stuff. But comic book wise, I did read Spider-Man sporadically. It wasn't like I would pick it up every month when it came out. It was only when you would go to like NPO when that was a thing, and they would have, I think, it was a Panini Press republished the American comics for the UK. And I remember the first ever comic book I bought in Collinswater NPO, and it was Spider-Man versus the Rhino. And from then, I was always like, this is the coolest shit I've ever seen. Then when the movie came out, the first movie, I think, if I remember correctly, I don't know if it was either the first or the second. I think it might have been the first. My dad took me out of school early because we were going on holiday the next day. So it was like the second to last day of school. My dad took me out of school early. And I was like, why are we leaving school early? And my dad was like, oh, we're going to go see Spider-Man before we go on holiday. Because if we don't, we won't get to see it. And that's why my dad's the best.
Not all heroes wear capes. That sounds fab. So my dad sadly didn't take me out of school to see Spider-Man. I was already out of school. I think I'd have been at university 2000. I think I'd have been first year at university. So I'm pretty certain I saw the first Spider-Man movie at Dublin Road. R.I.P. But yeah, as I say, you mentioned the cartoon. Love the cartoon. Love the cartoon. I remember that was kind of live and kicking. I think BBC One had that. They had the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm watching that. The games in the PlayStation, I remember playing, and actually over lockdown went back. They're fiddly as hell now, and the graphics that you thought were, oh my god, these are amazing. And isn't that the one that's got like Doc Ock and Carnage merging at some point in the end?
Yeah, at the end you have to like run through tunnels away from them, but of course with the PlayStation 1 camera being what it is, you would be like, oh, I'm going forward, but you're actually climbing up a wall. You'd be like, no. Yeah,
the controls weren't great, but hey, back at the time we thought they were fab. So we're both Spider-Man fans. 2002, Sam Raimi, that guy who made the wonderful horror movies that are The Evil Dead. Drag Me to Hell, would that have been out at that point? I don't think that would have been out around... I think that comes after Spider-Man.
Drag Me to Hell is 2009?
So that's after the 3 Spider-Man movies had hit cinemas. So yeah, I always find it funny when we think about Sam Raimi, this horror guy. And here we see him being front and center with this franchise, bringing all his creativity, all his energy to the franchise. And yeah, we're going to talk about the 3 movies now. And we're going to kick things off, of course, with Spider-Man from 2002. So before we get into that, I think we'll play a clip.
The Green Goblin, you like that?
Mr. Jameson.
Made it up myself. These weirdos all gotta have a name now.
Mr. Jameson, Spider-Man.
Hoffman?
Yeah?
Call the patent office, copyright the name Green Goblin. I want a corner every time somebody says it.
How about green meanie?
Spider-Man wasn't attacking the city. He was trying to save it. That's slander.
It is not. I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
You don't trust anybody. That's your problem.
I trust my barber.
So that's a clip of Spider-Man from 2002. There's things I know that straight away I can say, as much as I love the film, and I genuinely do, for me it's just one of the best, if not one of the better, if not the best, origin stories for, and I kind of set, for me anyway, it set the benchmark, I think, for what we compare now, particularly when we have all the MCU, and I think it set the point so well that when we finally see Spider-Man entering the MCU, they were like, we don't need an origin story. It's a long story. Got bit by a spider. Aunt May got hot now. Just, it's fine. But that's my thoughts. But I have said in all 3 films, I think there's problems with the relationship between Peter Parker and MJ. Some of the special effects, they're very Matrix Reloaded. You know, that kind of very computer graphic-y in certain sequences. I think there's one sequence where he's climbing up the walls. I know in Spider-Man 2 there's a fight sequence between Doc Ock and Spidey that is very kind of like, ooh, that's very CGI and their faces aren't right. But I think it stands the test of time, and I think largely that's because you have great actors in the roles. We have Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, we have James Franco, and of course we have sneery Willem Dafoe as the campy Green Goblin. I love the film, and rewatching it, I have to say, of all of them, as much as I love Willem Dafoe, I think it's Kirsten Dunst who kind of steals the show, and not just because of her see-through top in the rain, Adam. OMJ, do the Spidey kiss. But I've rambled there a little bit. I'm going to say there's flaws with the film, but I can't look past rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah, I think, at the time, obviously, you didn't think that the CGI was dated, but it's almost gave the Raimi movies sort of like its own style, where, if you think of the Raimis, the Webbs, and the Watts as three different like sort of comic runs, the Raimi ones kind of feel more Ditko than the rest. And it kind of feels like, now that it's a bit dated, it's like looking back on Ditko's art and it being, a bit dated, but it was just, that's the style of it, and people like that style, and it's great. But in terms of performances, like you say, everybody's fantastic. Willem Dafoe licking his fingers after trying to put it, for some reason, in the mac and cheese, and Aunt May slapping his hands away. Fantastic stuff. Ultimate scenery tune from Dafoe. The last sort of battle between him and Peter with the glider impaling him and him going, oh no, is like pinnacle childhood, like, oh, he's a fucking bad man, like he was going to kill Peter just outright, even though he was trying to be good. There's just so many moments, there's so many quotes from it. I'm a bit of a scientist myself, and stuff like finish it, can Spider-Man come out to play? There's just so many great moments, and so many moments of Spider-Man swinging that just feel cathartic. Like, Raimi was able to capture the emotion well of Spider-Man to make you feel what it would feel like to fly through New York. With the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane, maybe the gaslighting is a little bit intentional, because Mary Jane obviously comes from a broken home, and it's shown more in this movie than it is in the others. But looking back on rose-tinted glasses, it could be me saying, oh, it's intentional, and Raimi's really smart to have like that trouble at home be carried into her relationship in the future movies. But I do just feel like it is a bit more of Raimi not really capturing the relationship between them well enough.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just reading too much into it with 2024 glasses on. And I think it's definitely more the case in Spider-Man 2. It was like, I've changed, MJ. I'm not going to be an empty chair. Do you love me? No. Do you love me? I'm thinking of maybe not marrying Jonah's son, JJ's son. Do you love me? No, I do not love you. You are not the woman for me. Yeah, and I suppose you have that big sequence at the end, and everyone always thinks of that quote. When I hear that with great power comes great responsibility, I always think of Tobey Maguire. I always think of that quote when he's at the grave near the end of the film. Now, you mentioned Willem Dafoe. I love Willem Dafoe, and we haven't really talked about J.J. Simmons as well as J. Jonah, because there's just perfect casting to the point. I don't know if it makes sense, I suppose now we've got the whole multiverse kind of thing, that the MCU, Marvel, they brought him back because they were like, we're not going to get better casting than that. Who else could you think of to play that role? But Willem Dafoe, I know he plays the Goblin super campy. He does have his creepier moments in the film. But I always wondered, and I was rewatching it, do you think it's a mistake? Because the costume with the Green Goblin, I know it's kind of, in the comic books, it's much more like, it's like a rubber mask kind of thing. It's not the kind of mechanized mask, green mask that we see in Raimi's film. But you think it's a shame that we don't see his face more? But when he's doing that performance as the Goblin, you can kind of see his mouth a little bit. But I think it's the fact, I kind of want to see his eyes. And you talked about that sequence. Don't tell Harry. I don't know why he's talking like a 5-year-old boy. Don't tell Harry. When you see his face and you get him, see him, there's sequences where he's being the Goblin, like in his reflection. It's amazing because it's Willem Dafoe, fucking stupendous actor who just can do that kind of role in his sleep. I do think it's a shame that we don't see his face, but he's having a ball, and I know I'm jumping the gun when we see him then returning in the Tom Holland stuff, and you realise just what a great villain, because I know we did a little poll on our Facebook and Twitter feeds about who was your favourite villains over the 3 movies. And it's not much of a spoiler to say that Doc Ock came out on top in both, with Willem Dafoe second. But I think his Green Goblin deserves a little bit more love. But that's, for me, my only problem is, I think he deserves a little bit more love, but I just wish we'd seen his face a little bit more.
I think it's one of those, the CGI at the time wouldn't have been able to handle the goofiness that he would have been pulling off. So it's it's a blessing and a curse that he has the Power Rangers-esque mask, and they make it fit it into the story. I always was weirded out, whenever they first go into Osborne Industries and they're showing off like the glider thing. Do you ever see the guy on the glider has like a rubber like mask on that's like skin, like flesh colored mask?
No.
Go back and watch that scene. It's like as if like, do you know like the mask from Drive that Gosling wears? It's like that sort of mask, and it's just the guy on the glider going up and down in that. And I don't know if maybe at some point in the production they changed it. I know there is footage of a goblin-esque mask that they had designed and they were going to go with. That had like lots of mechanisms in it to make it look creepier than the actual just normal green head mask. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen something a little bit more grotesque. And obviously going into No Way Home, they obviously realized that they want to see Defoe's face, so they just get rid of the mask and just give him goggles, because they want people to be like, oh, Defoe was there. He's getting his money's worth.
Yeah, he did all his stunts in No Way Home. We'll keep that for the Tom Holland chat. But yeah, I think what Raimi's film does really well, it's coming back to that thing, it sets the foundations. It's a little bit like what Nolan did, and everyone knows I love Nolan and Batman Begins. He set really strong foundations for them to go and move forward with, and they really did that in Spider-Man 2. They tried to pull on threads, probably too many threads by the time we get round to Spider-Man 3, and then you throw Venom into that mix. It's a film that's just being pulled in too many ways. I know we'll talk about 3 in just a moment, but I come back to that. But I think what Raimi does is all the energy he has, and I'm probably going to get the wrong term. I know we kind of see it in through all the films, the crash zoom, the kind of thing that all those trademark Raimi moments that we've come to know from the Evil Dead movies, we see here. It's his energy. He's clearly someone who is a fan of the character. He's talked about that, and it comes through, and I think it manages to be, without being the nerd, it's that idea of you're flicking through the comic book pages, and those panels, he does a really good job in bringing that origin story that we know, so many of us know. He does a really good job of bringing it effortlessly to the big screen, and it's fun. It's not burdened by anything. It's not dark like the X-Men movies. It's bright and shiny, and it's probably, for me, that's those nods back to the Superman movies. And I know some people have issue particularly with the Raimi films, but it's in all of the Spider-Man movies. Maybe not so much I can think of in the Holland ones, but the Spider-Man in front of the American flag. But I think you have to put it into some sense of context, particularly the first and second one, I guess. So close after 9/11, there's the trailer that got pulled with the World Trade Center. I remember vividly seeing that in the cinema. I remember seeing that on the big screen, kind of going, wow, what a trailer. And I think the World Trade Center was going to be a plot point within the movie, that they had to retool that. So it's important, we always talk about contextualizing movies. This is, 2002. This is right kind of in the wake of 9/11. And you get that. I get you have the Spider-Man in front of the flag. We have, Americans, throwing their rocks at the old goblin, saying, you want a piece of him, you got to go through us. And I know you even see that more in Spider-Man 2 in the train sequence. Everybody loves. I don't know anybody who doesn't love that train sequence. But is that a thing for you? I mean, rewatching them for the pod, and I know I was aware at the time, I'd forgotten about the flag waving and the Spidey just jumping out in front of the flag. And I'm pretty certain it's in all three of the Spider-Man movies. He does that.
Yeah, I remember listening to a podcast about Spider-Man, and it was a podcast with Americans, and they were saying that the weekend they went and seen Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was swinging in front of the American flag, everybody in the audience stood up and applauded and cheered. And it seems that at that time in the world, it was sort of like a sense of relief. It was a hero for New York and for America. So it had the benefit, like we talked with 28 Days Later, it had the benefit in hindsight of being after such a global event. And if there's people listening to this now that weren't born during 2001 and 9/11, the world was a different place. It's hard to describe to younger people that the world was completely different. Media was different. The way people talked online was different. The news was different. And to see Spider-Man 1 now, it is, it's kind of in an earnest place of just telling a story and fighting bad guys. And like you say, with the Donner Superman, it was just being earnest in this is a good guy, this is a bad guy, they're gonna fight, the good guy gets the girl and saves the day. Obviously with Spider-Man, he doesn't get the girl, at the end. That's just the tale, that's just the woes of Spider-Man. But after this movie, into Spider-Man 2 and into things like Transformers, I know it's a completely different franchise, but Transformers, the world completely changed, and America completely changed in the sense of where its heroes came from in terms of cinema. So it is an interesting parallel, or difference between Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2. The scene of them on the bridge, but you got to go through us, and then the scene of Spider-Man 2 on the train, where the New Yorkers come together, and you hear the guy be like, "Oh, he's about the same age as my son." These were things you heard on the day of 9/11, with the people rescuing people from the rubble and stuff. And it's just something that the Garfield and the Holland movies can't really capture, thankfully, obviously, because there's no sort of disaster at that level. But it's what kind of gives Raimi's film a sort of edge, even though it is so light. There is that undertone in the background of we're Americans and we won't take this shit.
When you look at it now, you see the flag waving and you go to yourself, ugh, all right, okay. And it's coming back to what we were talking about in the previous pod with The Boys. It's like how America sees itself. You know, it's Henry Cavill as Superman, but how it really is Homelander. And I don't think that was the intention here. And maybe it's just because I'm coming at it with rose-tinted glasses for the character and rose-tinted glasses for Sam Raimi. I don't know if that was intention. I just think that is a reaction, particularly in 1 and 2. 3, I guess we can come to the events of 9/11, and as you say, and how it kind of shaped and shocked. I remember at the time Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was a Collateral, it was out around the time, that was delayed. Other film, I think Swordfish was delayed, and he talked about how for a while anyway it's gonna change what we can and can't show on screen. And weirdly, it just popped into my head because I've been off and we're doing this pod remotely because I haven't been well for a while. I started to go back, and I've made this point before, I haven't really rewatched many of the MCU movies, and I went back and rewatched the Avengers, just particularly the Avengers movies, and you go, wow, from going from that to sense of like, we don't know if we can show cities being destroyed, to what we see in the Avengers, what we see in Infinity War, all that stuff, particularly the opening sequence of Infinity War, where it's like, wow, it's, you're basically, you're going through New York, destroying half of it. But anyway, that's a little digression from me. Other thing, I know we're going to be talking about Spider-Man 1 and 2. I guess we can kind of jump in between because they're very interconnected films. But I think I made the point earlier, I had forgotten how good, not that I'd forgotten how good an actress she was, but as much as I love Tobey Maguire and he brings that earnestness to the Peter Parker, he captures the geekiness of Peter Parker. And I know in kind of the comics they've moved away. I think the Ultimate Spider-Man, they kind of moved away from being such a nerd, but he is a big geek at heart. He has that connection with Harry, of course, who's the slick guy, rich. If anyone's going to get MJ, it's going to be him. And of course, Willem Dafoe's character is much more drawn to Peter Parker. But I know this is again kind of jumping the gun. The Tom Holland movies tried their best to keep Spidey at school, in college. The Garfield ones kind of tried to give us like this teenage Spider-Man, but it's a man playing that role. I think one of the things, for me anyway, that Sam Raimi got right with all 3 films. Yeah, you kind of have to believe that Tobey Maguire's a lot younger than he is when you're first watching the first movie, and again, cinema has changed a little bit since then, but I think he clearly decided early on, it's like, right, we're going to just have Spider-Man getting old. So we see him, by the time we have Spider-Man 3, okay, he's not found his way, he's not kind of living the big life, but he's not at school anymore. So I don't know, I know I'm kind of jumping about and scatterbrain thoughts, but for you, I think that was a good move in the sense that we're not going to just keep them in school. We're going to show these characters going off, trying to find their place in the world. And I guess that comes back to the undercurrent of the narrative with Peter Parker, particularly in 1 and 2. Does he want to be Spider-Man?
Yeah, it's an interesting move because I think with what the Holland movies do is they're more of like the John Hughes-esque, we're in school and that's the sort of tone they're going for. Whereas in this, it's like Peter's in school for like that one fight with Joe Magliano, and then 2 minutes later they're graduating, and MJ has a shitty job at a diner. Peter's trying to get work with the Daily Bugle, and I think maybe Raimi took a lot from the animated cartoon of the 90s, because that sort of was Peter grown up sort of in college, if I remember right. It's just like that Spider-Man in the comic books now that is just always at the age of like 27, 28. Like he never really gets any younger, never really gets any older. Um, Obviously, Raimi loves the idea of Peter marrying MJ. For a certain amount of readers at that age, that was a big plot point for the character. Obviously, I'm sure Aaron from Comic Book Guys would throw down in fury at the what's the story where the devil takes their marriage? Is it like One More Day?
Yes, you're right. I remember talking to Aaron about that before. One More Day, yeah.
So for a certain amount of people, after One More Day and into Brand New Day, that's kind of when they stopped reading Spider-Man. So the classic era is from 60s to like 2000, and Raimi sort of captures that era of Spider-Man. Would I like to have seen more high school stuff? Kind of, yes. That's what I enjoy about the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. And that's what I enjoy about Homecoming. And then it's kind of what I don't like about, don't want to jump the gun, but that's what I don't like about No Way Home and Far From Home, is that, they take the school's aspect away from Holland, and now he's just on a holiday and on the run or whatever. I want to see Peter in school, especially if you're going to have a younger actor. So hopefully the next one with Holland lets him be more in college. I like my Peter Parker to have a complicated personal life and trying to balance a lot of stuff at once. And that's what Raimi has with Peter. He has the I want to take photos of men playing chess in the park, and J. Jonah being like, give me pictures of Spider-Man. I don't know. I think, if they were going to go for a younger Peter, they would have had to go for a younger actor, but I think Raimi was probably right to make him older, because that's sort of the Peter that Raimi grew up with.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect point where we should play another little clip. So I was doing a little bit of research, again, shock horror listeners, I know, and I found an interview with Tobey Maguire on the Howard Stern show, talking about getting the role of Spider-Man and preparation, because he's a pretty buff boy by the time we see him on screen. So let's play that interview.
Spider-Man is the dream job of all time, is it not?
It's pretty great.
Are you afraid of getting typecast, or are you going to embrace being Spider-Man?
I'm embracing it. I'm not really afraid of being typecast anyways.
How long does it take to shoot a Spider-Man movie?
We shot for about 5 months, but there's a whole prep time, and then all the computer stuff afterwards takes a while.
And what'd you do? You do special workout? Because when you finally turn into Spider-Man, you're muscular as hell. Well, how did that work? How do you get that size?
I worked out for 5 months, 6 days a week, up to 4 hours a day.
And do you eat more food when you do that?
Had a nutritionist, and I was eating 4 to 6 meals a day. Lots of protein.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
It is a dream job. Were you competing with a lot of guys, or was it just right from the get-go you were going to be Spider-Man?
In Sam's mind, I think I was the guy, but the studio wasn't sold on me immediately.
And when they weren't sold on you, isn't it true he went and shot some film with you to prove to them that you'd be a good Spider-Man?
It was a bit of a process, but first we did like an audition on videotape in a little room, and they got it. Took them a couple weeks to see it.
Were you insulted?
My ego was rubbed a little bit, you know.
I mean, you've done enough work. I mean, they could certainly rent Cider House Rules or Wonder Boys and see how you act.
Sure.
And yet who did they want in the role? Who were they suggesting?
I don't know. I heard so many names, but it was all rumors as far as I knew.
But this was the role you wanted.
I wanted to do it, and they saw the tape, and they said, well, we know he can act. We want to see him do an action scene.
Right.
So we did a proper screen test, and I wore a blue unitard. And, the unitard compresses your muscles, so you couldn't see definition. I was in pretty good shape, so I peeled the thing down and tied it off of my waist and did the fight scene topless.
I thought you were terrific in the movie.
So that's Tobey Maguire talking about his casting as Spider-Man to Howard Stern many years ago. So, Adam, I've mentioned this before. For me, Maguire's great as the geekier side of Peter Parker. I don't always know if I get him as a Spider-Man, and I think in the first film the suit, the suit looks great when you see. I mean, it's undeniable when you see it on screen. It makes a little tingle. But I think he's a little bit. I don't know how to say it. It's right. He's a bit chunky looking in it. There's not. I think it's by the time probably 2 and 3 they've kind of refined it a little bit. But yeah, that's my only kind of niggle with him, in the sense that I think he's a great Peter Parker. I don't always know if I buy him as Spider-Man, but then I guess is that not maybe the point of the character? Is that he is meant to be this nerdy, gawky guy, and he's also going out your favorite neighborhood spider, just spidering about. But a lot of people, Adam, got very upset with the Raimi movies because they fucked about with the mythology. Because in the comics, our Peter, he creates, his web fluid through science, power of science. But for poor old Tobey, he gets a little bit excited at him. He's going to be splatting the place everywhere, left, right, and centre. I have to admit, never had an issue with it when I watched it, and I'd be lying if I said I did. And even rewatching it again for this, is like I don't really have that much of an issue. I think now of like the little bit in No Way Home where they make a joke out of it, where they're basically like, "What? It comes out of you?" It's like, yeah, it does. Yeah, long story. But was that something for you? I know that's the big kind of deviation, I guess, from the mythology of Spider-Man and his, intelligence, that he's so smart and clever, other than the fact that he's got zero money, but he's somehow able to build that Spider-Man suit. I know the kind of MCU kind of solved that problem when he's best mates with Tony Stark. But was that an issue for you back then? Now, the fact that the old web fluid comes out of him?
I think it's like, now thinking about it, it's obviously disgusting. Like, it's a weird change to make, but obviously, Raimi can't justify him being like, well, where does he get it? Like, how? I know he can make it, but like, how? It just simplifies the story more. And back in the day, I didn't mind at all. Never really thought about it. In the second one, when his webs don't work, obviously didn't get back in the day that it was a euphemism for not being able to get it up. I was just, oh no, he can't web anymore because he's self-conscious about it, I guess, or didn't want to be Spider-Man. No, I never really thought about it. Even the only thing, when you're playing the game, like Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation, and you have to like, no, you didn't have to. I was going to say you had to collect web fluid, but you only did that in the PS1 game. PS2 game, you just had infinite webs. Never mind me. Yeah, never bothered me. I know it's not like back in the day, or well, like now, where people are like, Wolverine in Deadpool and Wolverine wouldn't have been wearing this outfit because he's not in there. You're like, shush. Back in the day, nobody cared, and if they did care, it was just people in comic book shops being like, well, actually, he built his own web fluid. You're like, right, okay, nerds.
Shut up, Dad. None of that talk. And actually, I think, isn't there a deleted scene where I think they talked about they did delete, or they did shoot an option where he makes them.
Yeah.
And then I think they just were like, it's just going to be, as you say, it's going to be simpler. So we talked a lot about the first Spider-Man movies. We're old men, Adam. I thought it would be a great opportunity. You mentioned earlier on about the fact that, particularly looking at the first Spider-Man film post 9/11 and putting that in some sense of context and kind of where the US, particularly New York, was at that time, and when you have a superhero set in New York, and how people might view the film. And you mentioned how it might be different for viewers born after 9/11. So we reached out. We're always getting him on the show. The lovely Brian Mulholland. When he's not talking about Film Devar, we get him on this pod to talk about all things Spider-Man related. And more importantly, Brian has brought a friend.
Hello, everyone in Banterflix. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about some of our favourite films. I have been taking my son to see the re-releases of the Spider-Man movies in the cinema. So far, we've seen Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, and hopefully seeing Spider-Man 3 this weekend. These are the Tobey Maguire ones, and we've really, really enjoyed them, watching them again on the big screen. There's been great crowds at it, and we even met a few people cosplaying as Spidey outside when we watched Spider-Man 2. I brought my 6-year-old Spider-Man fanatic son, Corey, to the cinema to see them. It's the first time he'd seen them the whole way through on the big screen, which is the way they deserve to be seen. So I'll just ask him now what he thought of the movies and his favourite parts. So, Corey, what did you think?
I thought the first one was really good because it was like the scary part was Green Goblin, but the good part was when in Spider-Man 2 when Harry Osborn found out that Norman Osborn was Green Goblin, and also I remember the Doc Ock scene where Dr. Octopus was like, remember that, oh yeah, the train part? It was really good because
That was your favourite part?
Yeah, that was my favourite part.
And this is, and which Spider-Man is this?
Spider-Man 2.
It's Spider-Man 1 and 2, but what do you call the actor?
Tobey Maguire.
And he's the friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man?
Yeah.
And what rating would you give the first Spider-Man out of 10?
10.
10? And what about Spider-Man 2? What would you give that out of 10?
A 10.
Another 10? And we're looking forward to Spider-Man 3?
Yes, I bet it's going to be good.
And do you know what villains are in it?
Sandman.
Who else?
Electro. No, he's in the Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah. So it's Sandman and?
Venom.
Venom. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. Well, we'll say bye to everyone on Banterflix.
Bye.
Thanks for letting us chat to you, and go and see Spider-Man in the big screen. It's well worth it. Bye.
Bye.
So that's Brian and Corey. Doesn't Corey just make your uterus tingle, Adam?
He is the bestest boy, and any young boy that loves Spider-Man is going to grow up to be an absolute gentleman, just like his father.
He is going to be a gentleman. I have to say, I just had a little smile on my face, 'cause I thought it was just going to be Brian talking about it, and then I didn't expect to hear Corey. So there we go. That's Corey and Brian talking about the Raimi Spider-Man movies. They've been to see them on the big screen. I'd love to get out and see them. I just haven't had a chance, because I said earlier on I haven't been too well. I've been at home. But yeah, I think we've talked a bit about the first Spider-Man movies. I know we're kind of jumping in between 2 and 3. Just before we go, I think I mentioned this earlier on. You've got this great cast assembled. You've got Maguire, you have Franco, you have Kirsten Dunst, Defoe, in, I guess, the leads of that film, J.K. Simmons, as well as J. Jonah. I really forgot just how... I know we've kind of talked about her character being gaslit quite a bit in this film. It's like, you do love me, Peter, don't you? No, I do not. We must only ever be friends. But Kirsten Dunst, for me, Oscar-winning actress, fab anyway. But I forgot how great she is as MJ, and that's not just because she does the Spider-Man kiss and we see her nipples a wee bit, as I try to ruin my whole point.
She's really, really good. Also, boobs.
Although you're talking about boobs, the MJ in the Spider-Man cartoon,
oof,
there's an MJ with boobs. Woof, woof.
Get that yellow sweater off, MJ. I think Kirsten Dunst in the first one is doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of the script really isn't giving her anything, and you can really see the struggle in her performance with coming from a broken home, getting into a job and wanting to be a big star, but working in that shitty diner that every young actor works in New York, and then going into 2, it's a real step up, and it's sort of not a change of character, but she grows a bit, and after being told that Peter doesn't love her, she kind of loses that hope she had in the first one. Like, see the bit in the start of the first one when Peter's taking photos of her and then he gets bitten by the spider. Like, her like point to the paper to be like, oh, because she's got like picture. Like, it's just so adorable, and it's something that I think only really Kirsten Dunst at that moment in the 2000s, it was just perfect at capturing.
Yeah, she's fab in that role, and even just there's the scenes where there's like Peter's home because their houses are next door to each other, and her parents are having a massive fight, and they're just out chatting. It's like, did you listen to that? I suppose you were sitting there, you old fucking eavesdropping bastard. And they're just talking away. But I love then how she goes from that to kind of going, yeah, you're a cute guy, Peter Parker. And then Flash shows up with his sexy car, and she's like, I'm out of here. Goodbye. But yeah, by the time we get to see her in Spider-Man 2, and I guess it's important, we kind of mentioned it a little bit, that sequence at in the graveyard near the end, that idea of great power comes great responsibility. Once again, we have poor old MJ. She's been, nearly killed by the Goblin, where they've kind of used that big centerpiece we all know from the comics that involves Gwen Stacy. They kind of chop and change it, and it's one of the things. I know you're going to be talking about the Garfield ones on the next pod, not with me. I'll just throw out there, as much as I think those are flawed films, I love the fact that it at least tried to give some importance to Gwen Stacy, because she is an important character within Spider-Man lore. We'll talk about this when we're mentioning Spider-Man 3 and Raimi ones, but it's one of the things I commend, and I've talked about this before. I know I'm jumping about the place. Spoilers, sorry if you haven't seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but her death scene is just visually stunning. I know it kind of changes kind of certain aspects of the comic book of her death, or the comic book lore of her death, but it's just a stunning piece of cinema. But I think when we go back to that graveyard sequence, the end of Spider-Man, and we have Maguire's Parker forced to basically make that decision, it's like, well, if my enemies can get to me, they can get to the people I love, so I can't have MJ in my life. She's there, she's going, I thought I'd be thinking about Spider-Man, but I was thinking about you and how I want to see you again. I love you, Peter Parker. Let's just be friends, MJ. Let's just be friends. So she's had her heart broken. We cut to black. Just want to give as well, isn't it Danny Elfman doing the score? Oh, such a stupendous score, I have to say. And even through all three films. I think he does the score for the three movies. Because I do want to praise in Spider-Man 3, he does some great work with the score there, particularly around the character of Sandman. But we're jumping about the place. We have the cut to black. I want more. I want more Spider-Man. We had to wait 2 years. We finally get Spider-Man 2. And I think before we get into our review, I think we'll play another little clip.
Crazy scientist turns himself into some kind of a monster. 4 mechanical arms welded right onto his body. Guy named Otto Octavius winds up with 8 limbs. What are the odds? Hoffman! Yeah? What are we going to call this guy?
Dr. Octopus.
That's crap.
Science Squid?
Crap.
Doctor Strange.
That's pretty good. But it's taken. Wait, I got it. Dr. Octopus.
But I like it.
Of course you do. Dr. Octopus. New villain in town. Doc Ock.
So that's a clip of Spider-Man 2. Adam, going to say it now. Right from the get-go. Quintessential, one of the best superhero movies of all time. Fight me.
Jim, I won't be fighting you, as I'll be heavily agreeing. It is a marvel that they were that they were able to top what had already come before, and to have Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus. Whoever cast him in that movie should have been given the Nobel Prize. That's a Spider-Man 2 joke, Nobel Prize.
I got the joke.
The joke that Doc Ock tells at the presentation. Oh, if anybody's lost $500 wrapped in a rubber band, we found the rubber band. Great joke.
I do love Melina in this, and it's one of the things, and I think it's going to be interesting when we get to Spider-Man 3, because I know it's a thing that Raimi himself talked about. He always, even in Norman Osborn, he tries to find the humanity in his villains. You know, with Norman, it's someone that's driven. It's like he's about to lose his business. You know, this is what he has to do. He has to go to these drastic measures. Unfortunately, things go horribly wrong. With Doc Ock and Melina, again, we see someone who's drawn by love, the fact of what happened. This goes horribly wrong. Well, it's kind of convoluted because near the start of the film, we have the accident. He's creating this experiment, goes horribly wrong. His wife, who he loves dearly, who just tried to impress her by getting, learn more about English literature. Smooth move, Alfred. And she dies. There's this sense of kind of the arms. There's little nano. Is that the kind of thing that they have? He has a neural inhibitor that they have little thoughts of their own. So they're corrupt. That's destroyed in that experiment. That's what's then driving him to kind of recreate the experiment. His motivation's a little bit kind of convoluted, I guess, what I'm saying. But he's still this classic Raimi tragic hero where there is a little bit of humanity there, as much as there is someone who will quite, with considerable glee, dangle Aunt May, 20, 50 stories above New York and threaten to drop her.
And also break into a bank specifically to steal gold balloons and not paper cash money that he could use to build his machine.
Contactless, mate. get with the program, Doc. So yeah, this takes, I think, coming back to that idea where I think what Raimi did with the first Spider-Man was quite low key. In the same way, like we have, with Batman Begins, you get that big, massive, over-the-top sequence in, isn't it, the Narrows, where everything kind of goes, all hell gets loose because of Scarecrow and Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul, his master plan for destroying Gotham. But Batman Begins is quite stripped down, definitely when you consider of, Batman and Robin compared to that. But the first Spider-Man movie is quite a low key. It's an origin movie. He's fighting, Green Goblin, who isn't really he's quite maniacal. He's campy, but he's not there to kind of take over the world. Really, we don't really know by the end of the day what Goblin's plan at the start is to pretty much just save Osborn Industries, and then you kind of have to forget all that. So strong foundations. You then go with from that. You have things that are laid down. So particularly, I guess, the fact that Harry wants vengeance on Spider-Man. He's best mates with Peter Parker, who just so happens to be Spider-Man. All those plot threads. We have the relationship with MJ. And into that, again, we get Doc Ock, Alfred Molina, who again is someone of a bit of a muse, someone who's an inspiration for Peter Parker. And yeah, just as I said, it's weird because I thought Green Goblin would get more love in our little poll, but Doc Ock trounced it. He is a great villain, and I do mean it's impossible. I know I'm rambling, Adam. We've already mentioned it even before talking about Spider-Man 2. The train sequence is something I just adored at the time, and even now watching it. Yeah, there's a couple of little bits I think are dated visually in terms of the visual effects, but it's just a stunning piece of cinema that, again, I know Brian went to see Spider-Man 2 in the big screen. I'm gutted I haven't got the opportunity to see it again in the big screen, because I'd love to see it again. Watching it at home, still great, but such an amazing sequence.
There's a bit when they fall from the clock tower onto the train and they're like punching each other and there's like silence. It's just you can hear the sound of like them punching or whatever. And I remember I would have been 11, 12 at the time. And I remember that silence and me holding my breath, being like, oh, because like it was just so, I'd never seen anything like that. And to see from the clock tower to the train to Peter stopping the train, it's just a perfect example of what Spider-Man is in a nutshell. It's, you know, it's he's fighting a villain and then he has to stop the fight, and you know, because the whole part of the fight is that he's trying to save MJ, but the people on the train come first, and that's a big important part of the character, to the point that like he is almost killing himself to even stop. He's even revealed his identity to the point that he's like stopping and holding. It's a very like iconic image. It's kind of Christ-like, weirdly, of him with his arms stretched out trying to stop this train, and it's just like, not to be like flippant about it, it's just class. You know, you watch it and you go,
it is just
class.
It is just class. There's no denying it. And again, boring Jim repeating previous point, I guess it's also post 9/11. That's still there, without a doubt. And that, as you mentioned, that you mentioned it all we've talked about, so I'll not repeat it. That's all there. I think the interesting thing we see in this is by the time the film reaches its finale, and you touched on this, we see good actors who clearly been signed on for 3, maybe 4 movie deals, maybe saying, look, we want a little bit more. We don't just want to kind of have, you know, generic script A, so we get a little bit more for Harry. We get a lot more for Kirsten Dunst as well. She's definitely given a lot more to do, although she's obsessed, who wouldn't be, with that old spider kiss. Got everybody she meets. Here, just turn yourself upside down, give the wee snog. Nah, you're not Spider-Man. You're not Spider-Man. But James Franco, I mean, I know there's stuff more recently where I always kind of say, look, it's not us being flippant. We're two boys talking on a pod where so occasionally we're talking about shouting ourselves, and earlier on this pod we talked about a comic book or cartoon MJ with big boobs. This is not the platform for that. If you want to go and research some stuff about James Franco, we could put some show notes on the podcast listing, but I love that he's given something to do, and that's why when I did our Facebook poll, I threw him into the villain, because you start to see the foundations. We all hoped he was going to become the Hobgoblin. Let's not lie. We all hoped. Didn't materialize. I forget what they call his character in Spider-Man 3, but it's not the Hobgoblin. Although it hints at, I think, one of the Hobgoblin masks is seen earlier on in Spider-Man 3. But he's given a little bit more to do. Kirsten Dunst again. And I remember, I think it was in the trailer at the time, or it might have been something that MTV, the Movie Awards or something, screened that sequence in the restaurant. It's near the end of the film. And I mentioned earlier on, it's like the sense of like, you know, once again, we have old Peter, old MJ. She's engaged. It's like, I've changed. We're going to get together. She's like, I'm ready to be with you, Pete. Ready to like, well, actually, can't do it. just have to be friends. Remember I said when I changed? I've changed back. I want to be the empty chair guy again. And I remember, again, it's that, is that the right term am I using, Adam? The crash zoom that we see with Raimi, and it just looks fab. It's like you hear the bang and the clatter, and each time the camera's zooming in. There's other bits I think of in Spider-Man 2, because Raimi's great at this, the origins or the genesis of his villains, capturing that on screen, the sequence in the hospital when they're trying to work on Doc Ock, that's just Evil Dead.
Yeah.
And it's the same camera work and everything. And I always love this when you see Raimi doing this, and we got to see him doing it in, is it Oz? The Great and Powerful, when it's like there's shots and there's sequences like you did that for like a $5 on the first Evil Dead movie, and you're still bringing that same style all the way through. And I even recently, I guess, in the Doctor Strange movie, although the jury's out for that one and me, but I love that hospital sequence. It's just madness, but it's just Evil Dead.
Yeah, you're speaking to a fucking Evil Dead 2 fanatic, so even back then, before I'd even seen Evil Dead 2, the manic camera work, the intensity of horror, the girl getting dragged and her fingernails coming off, it's a shot in the arm of the comic book genre that you don't really see much these days. And weirdly, the last time you kind of seen it was in Multiverse of Madness with Raimi. For as much as I don't really enjoy that movie a lot, there is every aspect of himself that he puts into that movie is the bits that I seem to like. Probably you like as well, Jim. The fight with the musical notes, the creepy horror stuff with the Scarlet Witch, the crossfades, the zooms. It's the stuff that he himself brings to the movie that is the most enjoyable, and it is fun to see him in a Spider-Man movie, especially since the first movie kind of plays it so not straight, but there's jokes in the first one, whereas the second one he is really flaring out with that, and the shot of before the clock tower fight, Spider-Man swinging towards the clock tower, and then it kind of shows you that it's through the lens of Doc Ock's sunglasses. Just stuff that people wouldn't put the effort in or think about nowadays in terms of comic book movies. Raimi in 2004 was really showing people up of how it should be done.
Yeah, I think what Raimi does in all three of the films, even 3, he stamps his style on it and his personality, but it's not, and I'm going to be kind of careful how I word this, because it's not that I'm being negative. It's not like Burton with Batman Returns, where it like goes too far. It's still Spider-Man front and center. It's not, well, it is Raimi's Spider-Man because he's the director, but he's being true to the character of Stan Lee created, and he's bringing Stan Lee's version to the big screen, and he's not getting his Sam Raimi-ness, if that's a term, in the way of that, where I think Burton, as much as I love Batman Returns, it's Tim Burton's Batman. When you look and compare that to the first movie compared to the second one, love them both. I know I kind of went off and kind of fell in love with Christian Bale and Nolan, what he did, and kind of during lockdown went back and rediscovered the Keaton stuff, and not that I'd forgotten, but just was like, I forgot how good these were. And then he shows up in The Flash, but hey, the less said about that, the better. But yeah, all the things you've mentioned I agree with, but it's all the little things. And I guess, boring Jim, the fact that Raimi's prepared to be interested in the Peter Parker character. Does Peter Parker actually want to be Spider-Man? And you see that, the fact that he's losing his powers, struggling with this, and at one point he just kind of said, right, I'm done with being Spider-Man. There's a sequence where he's, I think, going to college, there's a guy being mugged, and he's ready to pull the shirt in the kind of classic Richard Donner Superman way, and he's like, no, I'm just going to go to school here, be alright. And for some reason, college kids are really cruel. There's that sequence where he's like just trying to go to school and he drops stuff and they're just fucking hitting him all over the place. I'm not sure, is that 1 or is that 2? I think it's in 2. But he's interested in the character, not just from, the skin out. There's an attempt to try and see, does Peter Parker want to be Spider? It's not like, it's the thing that problem with the Batman movies. Jim wanking once again all over about Nolan. Nolan's interested in the guy that puts on the cowl. Who's the madman that puts the costume on? Well, let's get in his head. Raimi's interested in that. And I think none of them, rest of them, they've all tried to get the kind of, I think the Holland movies have tried to get, well, I suppose maybe No Way Home is the exception. They've tried to get the burden of being a teenager in that sense, and the teenage angst. The Garfield ones didn't really kind of, I've been a while since I've watched them. I know there's the whole stuff where they kind of retconned and went the Ultimate Spider-Man way about kind of the importance of his parents. That kind of went, well, the whole series ultimately went nowhere. But I think the fact that Raimi in all three films is interested in Peter Parker, of the three, I think this is the one where it's just front and center. And that moment where he throws the costume away, and then of course JJ gets it. JJ gets it, like, we won. We got, and then there's that great moment, you know. It's like, oh, if only Spider-Man was back, you know, I shouldn't have done what I did. And then of course Peter steals the costume. He's a menace.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Jim. It is kind of the Richard Donner-esque, where he has like the Daily Planet sort of news team. Raimi kind of has his Daily Bugle news team, where the other movies don't even touch on the Daily Bugle that much. Obviously, the new movie does with J.K. Simmons coming back, but obviously Peter doesn't work for the Bugle, so he doesn't have that sort of interaction. But I would like to see more of that going forward. Although I might have to wait until James Gunn's Superman comes back to see any sort of newsroom action.
You just want to see the new Lois Lane. That's all you want to see now. You want to see her in action.
I'll not lie, listeners. I did send Jim a picture of the new Lois Lane the other day with the big what's happening.
I forgot, first time watching the first Spider-Man movie, I forgot Elizabeth Banks was in it. And I have a bit of a crush on Elizabeth Banks. And it's like, yeah, maybe this is set the foundations for that. Yeah, it's a hard one, kind of talking about the sequences. Of course, it's the classic sequel where everything's bigger. Sometimes that's not always necessarily better. I do think that's the case here. You mentioned in the first film the web sling, and I know Mark Kermode's talked about that. Like, he thought in the first film it wasn't great. There was no kind of gravity or reality to it. I think in Spider-Man 2 that's much improved, and you kind of forget that probably at the time these were really pushing the boundaries of special effects at the time. Some of them we look at now are dated. Like, as I said, there's sequences in Spider-Man. There's a sequence earlier on when they're fighting on the outside of the building, Doc Ock and Spidey and Aunt May's in the middle of all that, and when they're fighting, okay, visually it's okay, but when you see faces and stuff, it's just like the Matrix Reloaded, Matrix Resurrections, where it's computer characters, and that's come a long way. But I'll say this, and I know we haven't even got into Spider-Man 3, and I do get a worry that's the one we're going to talk about the most in this pod. That's already quite long, but the visual effects for Spider-Man 3, I think largely still by today's standard, 2007 when it was released, still stand the test of time, and you can see the improvement in the visual effects, particularly Sandman. I think they talked about Sandman in the production being a really complex character to bring. Raimi always wanted to have him in the movies. I think going back to where we started this pod, James Cameron wanted to have Sandman in his movie back then, and I guess there's that sense of visually we probably can't do him just yet, which is interesting. We talk about Venom in Spider-Man 3, but yeah, I mean, because we've been talking and kind of through Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, where do you want to focus in this section when we're talking about the second movie?
I want to focus on the fact that the Osborn butler is played by Bill Paxton's father. Did you know that?
I did know that. I think either on a previous pod we mentioned this, or just through random little bit of movie trivia. And he then does get in Spider-Man 3 one of the most chubby, really, exposition moments. It's like, is this maybe a reshot to try and make something work? Because where the fuck did that come from? In kind of the, I know we're jumping, Spider-Man 3, there is that sequence between the butler and James Franco, and it's like, well, actually, Harry, cleaned. I don't know why he's talking like Dick Van Dyke, but it's like, well, actually, Harry, cleaned your father's wounds that night, and it was actually from his own device. So it wasn't Spider-Man that killed him. You should go off and help him. So you should, Mary Poppins. Step in time. At the time when I watched it, I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, really? Watching it for this pod, I was like, oh, I forgot just how, out of nowhere, it's just clunky. It's like you've had this information all that time, and in the way that J. Jonah just always get me pictures of Spider-Man. Real men don't want nudes, they want pictures of Spider-Man. We have every week Harry Osborn sitting there going, wanna fucking kill that fucking Spider-Man bastard, fucking bastard. And he could at any point Al Butler could have went, well, actually, Harry, your dad was a Green Goblin, so he was. Step in time.
He's cleaning the Osborn family skids out of the bowl. He's like, finally, I've unclogged the toilet. I can spread the news.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a weird thing. There's loads of things in Spider-Man 3. It's a film I have a soft spot for, but it's a really flawed film. But I mean, the Butler, we don't really see. Do we see the Butler in the first one? It's really in 2 and 3 he gets a bigger role. I think he might be there in the first one.
I think he is. Do they go? Well, yes. I think he's in the first one with Norman. It's the only real time you see him, but
you're right.
You see him more in the second and third because Harry needs someone to talk to in the house. So it's just that
when he's not talking to his dad, the reflection.
Yeah, it's. I think Corey talked about this in whenever he was talking about his favorite moments from Spider-Man 2. The bit where Harry kind of finds out about Norman. It's such a great reveal, but also sort of. Do you ever get when there's a second movie in a trilogy? Reviewers will always be like, "This is the Empire Strikes Back of this franchise," and kind of Raimi does it here with the Harry reveal of smashing the mirror and showing all of the goblin stuff. It kind of does leave it on a note of oh shit, because he is going to become a bad guy. You have MJ running away from her marriage, running past the Punisher apparently, and into Peter's apartment. Even though Peter should have got with the Russian daughter that lived next door, she makes him chocolate cake, the perfect woman. And then MJ, it's a fun end because you kind of have, they're together, and then the realization that he loves being Spider-Man more than he will ever love her. And it leaves it on such a down note that it is the sort of Empire Strikes Back of this trilogy. And I wonder if Raimi did that intentionally.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I will say this. The ending of Spider-Man 2, as someone who loves the comics, loves the cartoon, sexy cartoon MJ, we do finally get to see the line. Like, they didn't do what Marvel did, wait nearly 10 years to hear Avengers Assemble. We get after the second movie at the closing line, go get him, Tiger. And God help me, but Kirsten Dunst just nails that line. Go get him, Tiger. And yeah, it's the fact that you have a great actor like her in that role, which is largely thankless, and she does a lot of screaming. I think I read somewhere, or maybe it might be in Spider-Man 3, that they just reused all her screams from 2. She didn't have to do the screams again. It's either in 2 they reused her screams from 1, or in 3 they reused her screams from 2. She does a lot of screaming, but she does a bit of singing too as well. She's finally going to be a star, or is she? Is Peter going to be an empty chair? And I know you're kind of saying it's that sense he'll love her, but he'll love Spider-Man more. But I think there's an acceptance by the end of Spider-Man 2. The two can coexist. We can have Peter Parker, we can have Spider-Man, and that means he can be with MJ. A bit self-pretentious, a little bit like, I will make the decision that we can be together. But hey, it's still, you know, that sequence, the big finale where, you know, she finally figures out that he's Spider-Man and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I still think there's flaws there in that relationship when we look through 2024, the Me Too movement, all that kind of stuff. There is problems there that I think the newer films have not tried to address, but tried to steer away from looking at it in that way. I think this Spider-Man 2 is a weird one, Adam, because I think it's a boring discussion because we're both sitting here going, it's fucking amazing. Here, see the bit in the train? Fucking amazing. See Doc Ock? Fucking brill. So I think, for the interest of our listeners, I think, would you agree, where I think the next hour probably of this pod, we're going to move on and talk about Spider-Man 3?
I think, listen, the teasing before we play a short clip, I think listeners might be surprised at how much we enjoy Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, you might be surprised our thoughts for Spider-Man 3. But before we do, I think instead of playing a clip, I think we'll play a little interview I found on YouTube from back on the film's press circuit when Sam Raimi sat down with IGN. Again, we'll put the link up in to hear the whole thing on the podcast notes. But here's a little snippet of Sam Raimi talking about Spider-Man 3.
There's a huge number of challenges in doing a film like this, obviously. Would you say that perhaps the biggest challenge that you guys, that you personally faced doing this was just trying to keep all those different narrative threads together? You got Gwen Stacy, Venom, Sandman, Harry, all that. Was that the big challenge?
I think it was. Yeah. Finding the way to take all of these characters' stories and tell just enough of them so that they didn't seem cursory or brief or a shortcut, and weave them together so that they were supporting the main character's story and interacting with it in a meaningful way, and that they were relevant to Peter Parker's journey in the piece, and finding just the right amount, like baking a cake and working with the ingredients to make it just right.
So that's Sam talking about Spider-Man 3. So 2007. Adam, you're going to be shocked. And as we're recording from home, my lovely wife is only a room away. I went on a date to see this.
Hell yeah.
I went on a date to see this purely for the fact that Snow Patrol did the closing credits, the song Signal Fire. And that song was everywhere at one point. And the girl at the time I was going out with, no interested in superheroes, not at all. Girl Elaine, and a time that no longer exists, from Limerick. And we went to see, in Limerick, Spider-Man 3. And she sat there the whole way through and going, what the fuck's this all about? What the fuck? She made one joke about the end about Sandman, where he goes, he literally just blows away. And that was it. And then she just enjoyed the closing credits. Spider-Man 3, I'm going to say now, is a really flawed film. And it's a film I think Raimi himself since has talked about being pulled in too many ways by Sony and their insistence that they wanted Venom into the movie, where he wants to make a film, I think, the love for Sandman. I mean, I mentioned earlier on about those kind of tragic villains. Sandman, the genesis of Sandman in this is a thing of beauty. It's stunning, and I mentioned that Danny Elfman score. It's like this classic kind of 1950s sci-fi movie as it's happening. It's a stunning sequence. And then you throw into that mix something that you've teased from Spider-Man 2, the relationship between Harry and Peter, the fact that Harry has now taken I forget what the gas, goblin gas, I forget the term they use specifically for it. We all hoped he was going to be the hobgoblin. As I mentioned earlier on, he was not. He's this weird kind of skateboarding goblin in the sky. And there's so much going on. I was thinking about this when I watched it. You could easily do Sandman and Harry, alone, take Venom out completely. You could do a Venom movie and a Harry movie. You could do Sam. It's just there's a villain too much in there, and I was thinking about this because Sam Raimi said, and after the film's release, he could never find the humanity in Venom for him to kind of get into the character. This coming from someone who gave us the Evil Dead. It's like, okay, did you always get the humanity of the Deadites and what they want to do and destroy our souls and rip them to pieces? Oh, yeah, okay. There's things he does right, really good. You've hinted about this with the symbiote and what he does with the black suit. It's a bit like Superman, when after Superman dies, he comes back and he wears the black suit. It's an iconic piece of Spidey lore. So I'm glad that it's there. I just don't think he's not that interested in... He's interested in what the symbiote can do to Peter Parker, but I don't think he's interested in Venom himself. Like, he's Venom as a character, maybe 15 minutes, even if that, in the film, really, maybe half an hour at most. He's not in the film a lot, and poor old Topher Grace doesn't get a lot to do.
I think the main problem for me with Spider-Man 3, and it is a movie I enjoy, in parts. We'll get into that in a minute, but the main problem for me isn't the Venom of it all. It's the Sandman backstory being tied into the death of Uncle Ben. I think it's the Jack Napier of it all, where this villain is linked to this hero's origin when it just doesn't need to be, especially when it's not a factor in the comic books. Because if it's in the comic books, you'd be like, right, I can forgive it because they're sticking to the source material. Comic books are funny that way. So this is the story we're doing. But with Raimi sort of just making that backstory up, it ties itself in a knot to the point that it's just not needed, because you had the Harry story there where, Peter could have got the symbiote, been jealous of Harry trying to take away MJ, not being strong enough to, win over MJ, the whole Gwen Stacy getting mixed in, there was a boiling pot of drama, because Spider-Man, as much as we don't like to admit it, the Spider-Man comic books are like EastEnders, but in the middle of it, he fights the Rhino. It is a melodrama in the middle of everything, whereas the Sandman story, bringing this drama back from the first movie, just kind of brings the whole story to a halt for me. And in terms of the Venom by the end of it, that is kind of the kick in the arse the movie needs, because it's sort of like the repercussions of Peter being bad. It's influenced this other person to be bad, and then now Peter has to fight himself, kind of like it's a reflection of fighting himself at the end of the movie. So yeah, I don't mind Venom. It could have easily have been I suppose he was fighting with the producers at the time. They wanted Venom in the third, when he could have easily been like, right, we'll set it up and put it in the fourth. It's not as if they were planning for a fourth anyway. So it's too many cooks in the kitchen, and everybody knows that, but it's not the specific cooks that everybody points to that I am not a fan of.
You mentioned this earlier on, like the dancing sequence, people take the piss off. I don't really have an issue with it, and it's a bit like you mentioned, and I'm not stealing your point, it's the fact that it's this geeky kid, and it's his idea of cool and confidence, and someone who, for large parts of the movie, like even for years, loved MJ from afar, and now has the confidence to go, all right, kid, let's do this. I've got my fringe. Let's go to a jazz bar, because that's where all the cool cats go. My issues with Spider-Man 3, there is a couple. I think throwing in the character of Gwen Stacy is a bit of a mistake. I just think a character like that, to throw her in that way, great actress. The name of the actress has been out of my head completely.
Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yes. How could I forget? We have Bryce Dallas Howard thrown in, playing that role. Lovely Bryce. Lovely Bryce. Anyone listen back to me basically objectifying her in every possible way in Argyle, listen back to that podcast. But that's not Gwen Stacy. That's not the character of Gwen Stacy. And to throw her in like that is just a bit throwaway. You've mentioned the fact that they retcon the villain with Sandman. I get why they've tried to do that, because they've tried to connect that to the sense that Peter is becoming... He's cocky now. He's confident as Superman. He's cocky. He's confident now as Spider-Man. You know, he's at the height of his powers. Suddenly this comes in. We have the symbiote as well. And he that idea of great power comes great responsibility, but he wants revenge. So I guess I get where you're coming from, in the sense that it's a bit silly. It's a bit, and we've already mentioned the Harry, your father's wounds were by his own machine. Stipping time. But we already talked about that. There are moments where I wonder, has this film, in post, was like, we need stuff to connect this together, right? This is going to have to be a reshoot. I don't know, because Sam Raimi's not here. Ted Raimi listened to the podcast and went, I ain't getting involved with those two motherfuckers. Don't know why he talks like that. But add into that Venom. I'm going to say this. I think the way Venom's on screen, portrayed on screen, particularly the symbiote itself, the way it kind of moves, is better than anything they've done with the Tom Hardy movies. I love how it kind of moves about, and kind of particularly the sequence where we have that dream sequence with Peter, and he's dreaming about Uncle Ben, not the rice, but his beloved uncle, and you see the symbiote kind of taking over. Weird things though, does it just become a suit that he can take on and off? Because it's kind of, or is that just meant to be a metaphysical thing? Is the symbiote always there? Because he has the black suit on, then he puts it away for a little while, and then Harry, I haven't even mentioned this. So Harry gets amnesia because he got hit in the head, right? And I don't know, Adam, another way to put this. And I know it's 2024. And I'm trying to think of a better way to paraphrase this. And I'm sorry, listeners, because I'm someone who's talked earlier on about how I think kind of Tobey Maguire's Peter's gaslighting MJ and kind of looking through post-Me Too context. There's issues. But it feels at times when I watch this movie like James Franco has been told by Sam Raimi, to paraphrase Robert Downey Jr. in a certain movie, to go full retard, right? Because there's just sequences where he has amnesia, he gets a hit in the head, and it's like, right, you're going full Forrest Gump on this one, right? You're going to be a bit simple, and you're going to really enjoy making eggs with MJ. You're like, okay, mate, calm down. And then we get the amnesia dropped, and we see Harry then being manipulative and kind of trying to kind of conspire to bring down Spidey. But also, before we even got that, just want to throw out, we always love a good meme on this podcast, and I do love the fact that the sequence early on in Spider-Man 3 where Peter's there, he's not just an empty chair, he's watching MJ, and he's sitting there happy as Larry, my life can't be any better, and we just cut to James Franco just sneering at him. I love that that's become a meme. I love that. But when he has amnesia, he's like, oh, I'm just glad to have my friends here. My papa is dead. Oh, I'm shit. And then he gets his memory back, and weirdly, MJ's like, right, you've got to do this thing for me. You've got to go break Peter's heart. I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be away off somewhere else. You've got to do this thing for me. All right? No bother. I don't know. It's the fact that I think in my heart of hearts, Sam Raimi wanted to do something with the Harry character, and I think was told probably no, that's not what the studio wanted. They could have had Sandman. I think they wanted Sandman in at some point, but I'll never to this day know why they didn't just go down the Hobgoblin route. I know that's kind of, again, if we're going with comic book lore, I don't think Harry becomes the Hobgoblin. I think he just becomes another Green Goblin, I think, in the comics from memory. But it's somebody else who becomes the Hobgoblin. But that would have been just something for me. I've talked a lot there, and I've said some stuff that I'm probably not that proud of. Apologies again, listeners. But go with it as you want. I think the Franco stuff is part of this film's problem in the sense that they've built this up for 2 films. It's not just something they sprung upon themselves. They sprung it on, as they say, when they first fight each other near the start of the movie, when Peter's decided he's going to propose to MJ. It's like when he's finally confronted by Franco, he kind of says, "You knew this was coming, Peter." It's like everybody knew this was coming, and they just fucked the landing.
It's a lot of wheel spinning as soon as Franco hits the pipe and forgets everything. Because up until that point, the movie's actually really good. You know, Peter has a fantastic conversation with Aunt May, who we haven't really mentioned. Rosemary Harris as Aunt May in all of these movies is fantastic. The second film, when she's like moving out of the house and he's like, "You sold my comic books." Great. The speech in the third movie when they're talking about the wedding ring, and later on whenever Harry or Peter was like, "Oh, I was there when Uncle Ben died," and she kind of like lifts her hand away from his. Fantastic stuff, especially because you never really get. Well, I suppose you do. In The Amazing Spider-Man, the Aunt May with Sally Field, there's some moments, and with Marissa Tomei, there's just the one moment in No Way Home. But in Spider-Man 3, everything up until, the speech with Aunt May and then the fight, which I think is fantastic, with Peter trying to like catch the wedding ring while fighting Green Goblin, fantastic. And then it's just wheel spinning for an hour while they sort of set up Sandman. There's a great fight in the street with Spider-Man and Sandman. Peter emptying his boots and being like, "Where do these guys come from?" Fantastic. But having Harry forgetting everything, having MJ be second guessing about the wedding, not really doing anything with Gwen Stacy, it's kind of just, I think that's a big problem with the movie and why a lot of people say it is the worst one, because you have a solid hour in the middle where nothing really happens until he takes the Venom suit off, and then the third act kind of kicks into high gear. A lot of the stuff, we've spoke about it in this podcast that we really like about Spider-Man 3, but it isn't a movie that I'm gonna die on the fucking hill for to say it's the best of the trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, I love that sequence. The genesis of Venom. I mean, I mentioned earlier on the genesis of Sandman. It's great, and it's that kind of classic 1950s vibe. It's very kind of PG-13 horror. And Sam Raimi knows what he's doing there, in that sense that we have Peter, he's trying to rip the suit off, whereas before he could just, that's what I mean, it's like he could just take it off and put it in a wee box somewhere. Now it's suddenly a problem to take off, but it looks great. All the kind of tentacles kind of going here, there, and everywhere, and then it's all dripping down and falls in poor old Topher Grace. He just loves Gwen. He wants to take a photo of Spider-Man and maybe Photoshop a few kind of fake photos of old Spidey breaking into a bank and stealing in poor old JJ. But yeah, it's just there's so much going on, and there's been so built up, and I think the fact that 1 and 2, I'm not going to say they're the greatest movies of all time, but in terms of the comic book genre, they're pretty perfect. And you've kind of, it's not that they dropped the ball, it's just the things that it's like the things that it sets up from the end of 2, it's like, we're not really interested. And that's like Chris Tarrant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's like, you want £250,000? We don't want to give you that. We want to give you this. And it's like, as you say, they were talking about doing a 4th film, and I think that was going to be Vulture. I think it was the Ben Kingsley. I think at one point, and Anne Hathaway was going to play Black Cat, and that's how she ended up getting the role of Catwoman in Dark Knight Rises. There's so much going on, but it's like they've had it's almost like what they left over from 2 is almost like a burden. And I always like it when a film says, right, we're not just going to, wipe it underneath the carpet. We're going to try and embrace it and carry it on. So there is a commendable attempt to try and balance all these strands. It's just that there's too much. And by the time we get to the finale, we've had that reveal of Harry and the butler. But then, I don't know, Adam. This is something that's always annoyed me in Spider-Man 3. And I don't know whether that's been a reshoot issue or it's a trying to kind of an attempt to capture the magic of the comic books and the panels. That big finale where Venom, Sandman team up. They've kidnapped MJ and they're gonna kill Spider-Man. That's their plan. But it keeps cutting back to this British reporter. And it's terrible. And I hate it. And I'd forgotten about it until I rewatched it. It's like, because all the flaws and stuff and the stuff with the butler, I can kind of go, okay, this is just possibly retooling, reshoots. I know James Franco talked a lot about, there's a lot of reshoots on this film, which is interesting when you hear James Gunn talking about his Superman movie, and he's like, I don't think we're going to need to do any reshoots. I planned it was storyboarded, worked on the script, shot what I needed. I might have to do maybe a day, but that's about it. I have a pickup for maybe that's about it. But it's always kind of, we always talk about this, we know so much about films and the production of films, whereas before, okay, the internet was a thing 2007, but like early on, like it was maybe like Empire magazine and kind of their set visits we learned about this stuff, or after the film was released. But that sequence, once it finally gets away from that reporter, it's fine. But she's never been in any other films. They haven't done that type of thing any other movies. It's just irking for me. And it's just something I go, when I watch this, like going, that's a bad call, Sam.
It's there's similar things in the other Spider-Man movies. In 2 is a good example, when Doc Ock is climbing up the wall of the building and then it just cuts to a random big-breasted woman in an office and she runs up to the camera and screams. That's the only other example of, Sam being so comic booky with that sort of like random character. But I know what you mean. I don't understand why. Maybe because she's British and we're from the UK, maybe it's, to our ear, it sounds a bit off. I don't know what maybe Americans are just like, whoa, this made international news. You're like, what, a Sandman creature fighting in a building?
I think I'd want to know about that. Can I also say, just when you're talking about random little moments, I had jotted this down and I meant to bring it up earlier on. In Spider-Man 2, Sam, he comes from that old 80s lore. He likes a bit of cleavage now and again. And there's a sequence in Spider-Man 2, I think it's just after the bank heist, or possibly, I think it might have just been at the start of the film, where there's a crime or something's going on, and Spider-Man just goes through, and there's just 2 very busty women, and they just run to the camera, jumping about, their ample cleavage, going over the place, and all their lines is to go Spidey, go! And you're like, yes, Spidey will go. But yes, I digress, Adam. That sequence, it just takes out of what I think could be pretty tense, and it just sucks all, for me anyway, it just sucks all the energy out of it. And I wonder, is it an issue to kind of fix, either an edit issue, or they didn't get the shots that they needed, or they've had to retool something? Maybe the fact that Harry's coming to save the day. I don't know. It just feels weird and sucks the energy out of that. And then of course you see, the confrontations between Venom. There's not so much a confrontation between Sandman, because he's a villain, but there's that tragic element to him that's like he's doing this to get money for his daughter, and it's revealed in the end it's like he's not this hardened criminal guy. What happened to Uncle Ben? It was just a mistake, Peter. Just a mistake. Everyone's talking like Dick Von Dyke tonight. I can't even say his name. But yeah, and we have Harry. That comes to an end. He's redeemed of sorts, in the sense it's like he's given up this sense of looking for vengeance against Spider-Man, but wants to be there to save his friend Peter Parker. So everything's all wrapped up in a nice little neat bow. It's interesting though you mentioned, because I've always had an issue about the size of Venom, because Venom, when you think of the comics, is this big brooding beast of a character, like what we see in the Tom Hardy movies. And here he's kind of like the dark even when he becomes Venom, he's same kind of size as Peter. So maybe it is, as you've mentioned, to that sense of like it's Peter fighting himself, and Venom is a representation of everything that he's throughout this film. He's horrible. I mean, that sequence at the jazz club, he's not just horrible to MJ, he's even horribler to Gwen, because he's bringing there purposely as eye candy to show off to his ex-wife, his former fiance, who's broke things off, who is feeling, throughout most of the film, is feeling very insecure about herself. Sure, her career's not going the way that it wants to be. There's this young, prettier girl who's cleverer than her, more in common than her than Peter, and that's ultimately what ends their relationship. But yeah, the jazz sequence is weird. The dancing I'll give you. The dancing sequence I have no issue with, but the play it, cat, all that stuff, it is weird and it's horrible. And I come back to the point, why really does MJ really want to marry Peter Parker? He's a bit of a gaslighting bastard, but hey, what can I say?
I think by the end of 3, it's depressing to say, but like by the end of 3, Peter is all she has left. Like she's lost her job on Broadway. She's back to working in a diner. Her best friend is dead. She can't really move home. It's like you kind of wish there was a fourth one to redeem MJ in a way, but like, what would you do? Like, even in the comic books, she is like a famous actress.
Well, I just want to say, I don't think she needs redeemed. I just think that it's the sense that, as you say, personally for her, it ends quite downbeat by the end of the third film. So not redeemed, but just kind of getting what she deserves, the success that she craves, that she's having to look at Peter, aka Spider-Man, getting all this adulation. He's replicating the kiss with Gwen Stacy. Maybe a fourth film, or even just, is there much of a reference to her in No Way Home, really? In the sense, I think, are they still together? Is it mentioned?
Isn't like it mentioned that like they're like, oh, she's your MJ too, like something like that. I can't really remember. We'll get to it when we get to the Hollands, but I'm not a big No Way Home fan. I don't know. It's one of those ones where it's like, maybe now in retrospect, if they did do a fourth movie, MJ would be given more to do because it is 2024. But I think back in 2007, if they had done another one in 2009, the way women were sort of treated in those movies back in the day, she still wouldn't really have got any sort of, cool thing to do. She still would have been that damsel in distress just for Spider-Man to save.
Very true. I will say this, and I know we're jumping the gun. It's just 'cause it's popped into my head. May as well get the thought out. We think of No Way Home. It's weird. I don't particularly like the Garfield Spider-Man movies, but yeah, I think of the three in No Way Home, there's that moment with him saving MJ, which is kind of like a clear nod to what happens with Gwen Stacy. I'm not going to sit here and deny that I didn't get a little bit choked up, because I was like, yeah, there's, everybody else has saved their MJ, Tobey Maguire, Tom Holland. He didn't save, okay, his MJ is Gwen Stacy, but he gets that moment of, not redemption, but that moment of, for him, kind of, that's an important character development for him. Because it's interesting, we don't really know at the minute what's happening with the Spider-Man franchise. I know they're going to move on with 4 at some point. Probably more than likely we're going to see the introduction of Miles Morales. I would suspect in 4, Tom Holland, I think, has kind of said he'll play the character as long as as Marvel want him, but he'll probably want to move on, or the paycheck will just get too big, or it'll just get recast as a completely different character. That would be the ultimate fuck off if we've got our new Miles Morales. It's Tom Holland. Boom. In blackface.
You know what? After the San Diego Comic-Con Doctor Doom announcement, it's not even surprising if that was something that happened.
We'll talk about that more in the next Ramble edition. I know that. But I kind of threw a lot there. From rewatching Spider-Man 3, it's nowhere near as bad, I think, as some people make it out to be. It's a flawed film. I've seen worse. I think there's been worse movies both before it and after it. There's been worse comic book movies in that. The Marvel MCU has dropped the ball, I think, at times more so than Spider-Man 3. I just think it's trying to do too much, where they probably could have said, if they take one of these characters out and leave that for 4, have just the symbiote just be, floop, bloop, 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 blooping about the place, and leave that as your kind of, imagine that. I know this is whataboutery and kind of returning to Marvel's What If now, but imagine end of Spider-Man 3, it's that sequence with him on the bed, and it's, blip, 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 and the costume goes black. I mean, whoa, boom, there is an Empire Strikes Back moment right there. I don't know, and I always find it really weird that Sam Raimi said he couldn't find the humanity in Venom. I come back to the point, this is the guy that gave us Evil Dead. Drag me to hell. I think it's just a fact he wasn't. I think the honest thing is he isn't interested in that character, and that's where the problem. And it shows. It's not. Venom's not given that much to do. He's interested in what the symbiote can do in Peter Parker, but he's not interested in Venom.
Yeah, like I said before, Raimi's clearly a Ditko kid, and Venom just wasn't part of that. Venom is a 90s creation through and through. It is the fucking, people being like, oh, Todd McFarlane could do no wrong. Rob Liefeld can't draw shoulders. Yeah, it's a shame that this is kind of how Raimi went out, and there's been interviews, in the recent past of Raimi saying, seeing the failure of Spider-Man 3 kind of disheartened him into working on movies, and it's nice to hear that, after Multiverse of Madness, he's become more interested. He has more movies in the pipeline, whereas before that, Oz the Great and Powerful, you thought, fuck, are you going to retire on this piece of shit? So to kind of tie it all together. Raimi's the best. Whether he's making fucking Spider-Man, Evil Dead, or For the Love of the Game. And it's a damn shame that we don't have somebody like him now making Spider-Man movies. Like, for as much as you love the Holland movies, they, to use one of the words kids use, Jim, they just don't have any sauce, you know? They're very sauceless movies. And I want somebody, like, imagine like an Edgar Wright making a Spider-Man movie. It would, I suppose they don't really care because those movies make $1 billion no matter what because of who the character is. But if they want to sustain the quality of the movies themselves, they need to hire a director that does have a distinct visual style and can come in with a vision for Spider-Man. Like I said, each Spider-Man kind of has been like a different comic run. And like any comic book, no matter how good the writing is, if you don't have an interested artist, nobody's going to read it because it's just dull as dishwater to look at. And that's how I feel about the movies as well. You need a interesting artistic voice, because that's what made the Raimi movies so successful to begin with.
Yeah, without a doubt, totally agree. And it's that sense of coming back to, I know I mentioned earlier on, Sam Raimi's doing his thing, but it's not getting in the way of Stan Lee's Spider-Man, in the sense he's not throwing all his sense and all his style, and it's getting in the way of things. So yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's interesting, and I know we don't have time to go into it, like post Spider-Man 3 and working on those 3 films back to back, he went straight back to not hardcore horror, but he went back to, I think Drag Me to Hell's an 18. I'm certain of that. It's at least a 15. He went back to horror straight after that and went off and went back to essentially, I guess, his roots. Then, of course, we know he went off and did Oz and stuff as well, and then more recently has done the Doctor Strange. I was going to say he more recently did the Doctor Strange movie, which is flawed, but like you mentioned, all the interesting stuff in that is Sam Raimi. If he was allowed to come back, be interested, or not allowed, if he was allowed to do another project in the MCU, I'd love to see him do it, but with more ability to do his thing. It's like you mentioned Edgar Wright, doing a Spider-Man movie. We'll never get, that's the great, shame we never got to see an Edgar Wright Ant-Man movie. That would have, I would have loved to have seen that. And I know there's elements of his script that are still there, and I do like the Ant-Man movies, but it'll always be, it's like the people that go, always wanted the David Fincher Steve Jobs movie with Christian Bale. That's what I always wanted. Or is it the William Gibson Alien 3? That's what we wanted. Edgar Wright's Ant-Man movie will always be the one that I wish we'd had. Who knows? I mean, I would happily take a Spider-Man 4. No, and I think the joy of the multiverse, and I know we'll probably talk about this again post No Way Home, is the sense that you could do that if you wanted. And it would be interesting to see what, like, could Sony do that and say, well, you can have, MCU can have the Tom Holland Spider-Man, but we have our Garfield and we have our Tobey Maguire, and we're going to, rekindle that. I think it would be probably complicated for, not for, I hate saying that term, I know you've used the phrase the average cinema goer. I don't think it would be complicated, but I just think it's like the Batman thing. It's like, right, so you're going to have a Batman that's part of this universe, and you're going to have an Elseworld Batman, and this, that, and the other. Just have one. I guess it's simpler. But part of me would like to see a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 4. In the same way, part of me wants to see Andrew Garfield just be given a good Spider-Man movie to be in. One that's not interested in where it's going, but just interested in telling its own story. And rather than setting, expanded universe, just do its own thing. But hey, Adam, we've got Kraven the Hunter to look forward to.
Yay!
So, yeah, I think we've talked for, over 2 hours about the Tobey Maguire movies. I'm going to be interested if you're talking for 2 hours about the Garfield ones. we could talk for nearly 2 hours about the Tom Holland Spider-Mans, as flawed as they are. But I do think we should maybe bring this pod to a close and just unashamedly say, I think of the live-action Spider-Man movies that have been out to date, I think Raimi nailed it. He might have kind of scupped the landing a little bit with Spider-Man 3, but I think he pretty over 3 movies pretty much nailed it.
I think it's, with them being back in the cinema now, and those cinema showings being almost sold out, if not sold out, it's a testament to the movies themselves, how high quality they are, that they still play to someone like Corey, who's 6 years old, who still gets excited to see these, 20-plus-year-old movies, and they still can entertain people as old, as crippled as me and you, Jim, and someone as young and youthful as Corey.
Yeah, so on that bright, wonderful note, I think we shall bring this pod to a close. So, Adam, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much to Aaron as well. Thank you very much to Brian. And thanks very much to little Corey, who I think has just revitalised Adam Neeson. So, yeah, great pod. I look forward, Adam, to hearing your chat about The Amazing Spider-Man and all things Andrew Garfield on our next pod. You won't have me on that recording. You're going to be flying solo on that one. So you've got that to look forward to. As always, at this point, we shamelessly sell our wares. You've got our YouTube channel where you can find old episodes of this podcast, old episodes of the TV show. If you so want to, make sure you subscribe on your various channels, all the various podcast mediums. You can get those, and you can listen to pods like this where we're talking about one movie or a series of movies. Or you could listen to our ramble, once a month ramble with extra custard now. Or you've got the crime scene to screen stuff with Joe and Therese. Loads of stuff. And even the old We Need to Talk About Disney. Loads of stuff there. If you can't find something somewhere within our back catalogue that you might interest you, you're not looking hard enough. And yeah, that's all I have to say on that. So I guess all that's left for me to do now is go look for some photos of Spider-Man around Belfast. But until then, stay sexy, true believers, and Excelsior.